Welcome back to the Street Theology podcast, where we bring current events and theological concepts to a street level. This month, in honor of Black History, we are highlighting previously dropped episodes that bring a relevant light to the impact Black culture has on our society and our faith. In the episode redropped this week, we drove all the way to Celebration Jacksonville to have a convicting, hilarious, and encouraging conversation with lead pastor Tim Timberlake. Pastor Adrian Crawford and Expressions architect Michelle Warner lead a conversation speaking into the truth that freedom is found in suffering. We hope you enjoy this episode with Pastor Tim Timberlake, recorded last year.
Guys, want to welcome you back to another episode of Street Theology. It's your boy, Pastor Adrian here, and I am joined as someone who's become pretty consistent on the pod, our Expressions architect, Michelle Warner. Michelle, what's happening?
Hello. Glad
Michelle,
to be back.
We are not joined by our other Pastor Derek.
I know,
man.
Old Faithful.
As I'm saying, the Clay Thompson of podcast, just sit there and shoot corner
He's
three.
been replaced.
He's been replaced.
Just kidding.
No, I know. Hopefully, interior Achilles. No, but Pastor Derek, he's not with us today because we took the pod on the road today for a very, very special kind of pod that we have today. And so for all you guys who are new here, again, Street Theology is simply about this idea of launching innovative reconcilers. We want to take theology, bring it down to a street level to help us in our everyday life with wisdom. Again, as we serve a God who actually wants us to actually live this thing out, to add value to the places and spaces we go. And there's no better way to intro our guest today as someone who actually truly is an innovative reconciler. We are filming today here in Jacksonville, Florida at Celebration Church. And our illustrious guest today, I'm going to say illustrious guest today, is Pastor Tim Timberlake, lead pastor here of Celebration Church. And beyond that, someone who first time I'd heard of Tim was not actually in the church space. It was actually in the basketball world. We travel. We know a lot of the same people with, and he'll get into this, the school that they started and lives they've impacted. But Pastor Tim, again, he travels the world, speaks, again, in so many different spaces in the church world, outside the church world, makes impact in all different types of communities and things like that. And we're excited today. We're going to talk a lot about background, current cultural moments, but also more importantly, his new book, The Power of 1440, the idea of this moment, making the most of every minute. And so I'm super excited. So Pastor Tim, man, thanks for coming to the pod today, man.
Super excited, Pastor Adrian. It's an honor to be on here.
Yeah.
Street Theology with you all. It's an honor.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. So, man, I guess the first thing is this. Before we get into this, because this is probably we're gonna start this thing off spicy. Mm-hmm. As basketball guys, who you think gonna win the NCAA tournament? That's the most important. Before we get into theology and all that, who you think's gonna win?
That's a tough one. You know, we got a couple of prospects.
Okay.
So Gonzaga's looking strong.
Yep.
Michigan is looking strong.
Don't say that because they play my guys. Don't say that. They play my guys.
We'll throw Florida State some love in there. And, I think those three are really kind of the strong suitors that have the positions, that have the strategy, that have the defense, that can compete at the highest level to really take it all. So, if I had to throw my hat in one direction, I would probably say Gonzaga.
Well, listen, I am a Florida State guy through and through. And so the homer side of me is saying Florida State, the basketball side of me, I've watched Gonzaga. I'm just like, I watch her. I'm just like, man, I don't know if I've seen anything like this because, I mean, again, right now they're about to make a run to potentially be the first team since 74, 76 to go undefeated. And again, when you look at it, and again, for all you guys like, man, basketball, you need to hear this. Is really important. All right. It has stuff to do with, we'll somehow rope this into God at some point. But we're roping out there. But the fact that, you watch, from Jalen Suggs, I mean, you got a top 4 pick. And then, but again, the guy was just a winner. The kid just wins and he just does whatever it takes to win. And when you got that, it just makes an incredible team. And so, it's going to be interesting. Again, it's funny because we'll have to talk about this later off air. But, I do radio commentating for Florida State. So I get an email yesterday saying, hey, if we make it to the Final Four, we want you to call the game live.
That's it.
But then I'm like, but it's on Easter.
Right.
So Coach Ham ain't thinking about that. It's on Easter Sunday. So I'm like this.
Shoot that video, man.
Play that pre-recorded sermon.
That's what I was
Throw
saying.
it up on the screen.
Hey, and again, somebody listen. So don't email us when I say this. Again, I didn't say it. I'm not gonna say that. But one of my friends who deeply loves Jesus, pastor, he's like, man, Lord willing, Easter coming back next Sunday. He's like, he's coming back next year. I don't know if Florida State gonna make the Final Four. You may have to take that one. I was like, man. So anyway, we'll have to figure it out. I know our team currently right now, who's listening to this podcast, they all freaking out like, what are we gonna do? We don't know. He's got to get past Michigan first. So anyway,
that's true.
But man, we're gonna dive into the pod. We really do appreciate you taking the time. And so I guess kind of again, you have being a huge kind of platform. But for those people who don't know, again, kind of tell people a little bit about where you're from, kind of a little bit of your background, and just kind of a little bit of your story.
You all are too kind to say I have a huge platform. It's minuscule, man. I'm honored to be on here. And, for me, I grew up in North Carolina, right outside of Raleigh-Durham. And my parents started a church in the early 70s. And the church ended up growing very exponential to the area that we were in. So the city that we were in was a city called Creedmoor, and the city was a population of 2,400 people. And so the first really 6 or 7 years of the church, they really started to see this massive growth of people just kind of coming from everywhere. And the church ended up growing larger than the population of the city that it was in.
Oh, wow.
And so from there, they kind of felt led by God to start a television show. And so they got this television show and ended up getting picked up by BET. So every morning at 6:30 a.m., they were on BET. From there, they were on TBN, INSP, and they were on 4 major global networks every single morning. And so the first thing people saw when they woke up was this couple preaching together. It was abnormal because most of the time they saw a man really doing that. But my father was really huge on empowering women to step into their calling.
Wow.
And so he considered himself a producer. He loved to produce.
I love that.
He loved to produce the call of God on my mom's life. And so they took a lot of hits because of it. At the time, there was only one other Black pastor on national television. It was Dr. Casey Price. But he and my mom were the first couple to ever stand in a pulpit together on a national and global scale. And so from there, the church, man, just continued to grow and take off. We still have people to this day drive 2 hours a Sunday to come to church. To this day, from Virginia all the way to Creedmoor, North Carolina, just because they felt like it was something different there than what it was they had experienced anywhere else. And so I grew up around that kind of movement and just saw God do some pretty incredible things. And at the height of the ministry and at the height of church growth in 1997, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 terminal throat cancer. And so I remember him kind of sitting down with us as a family and was like, hey, this is what the doctors have told me. This is how long they've given me. They gave him 3 weeks to live, or they gave him the option of having this experimental surgery that gave him a 30% chance of survival after he had it. So there was a 70% chance that he would die on the table, or 3 weeks to live if he didn't have it. So he was like, you know what, I'm gonna just take the risk and have the surgery. So he opted for the surgery. The surgery was one that they had done 3 other times, super invasive, where they cut you from the back of your right ear. They open up your neck all the way completely. And they removed a tumor from his throat the size of a chipmunk. So they cut him from ear to ear. But when they did that, they removed a quarter of his tongue. So he's no longer able to eat or drink or swallow through his mouth. He was fed through a G-tube for the rest of his life. And so my dad was a big guy, 6'5". He was a baller, loved basketball, 270 pounds, just country strong. And within 3 months, man, so I'm dwindled down to like 170 pounds. And so from there, he had to go through radiation. He had to go through chemotherapy. He had to go through all these different things just to have some type of life. And, for me at 12 years old, my perspective of God was, man, if this is the way he treats his servant, I don't stand a chance.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? Just because at 12, 13 years old, you don't really have faith on your own. You're standing off of the faith of your parents or your grandparents or the people that are around you. So I was like, man, I don't stand a chance. And so I stopped following what they had led me to follow and really kind of walked away from God, walked away from church. My heart was hard towards God. I thought to myself, man, how could God let this happen? At 12 years old. And so for the next 5 years, man, I just really kind of did my own thing, kind of pursued the life that I thought would make me the most money, pursued the things in life that no 12, 13, 14-year-old kid should really be out there doing. and got really good at it. And so on my 18th birthday, my dad sent me down, and he kind of is sharing with me what God has told him about my life moving forward.
Wow.
It's kind of like, those Old Testament stories in the Bible where the father sits the son down and he's like, okay, I'm leaving. It's time for you to step up and be a man. That's how I kind of felt.
Yeah.
And so he sits me down. He's just kind of telling me the story about what God has shared with him about my life. And, he doesn't know all the details of what I've been doing, but he knows that God has more for me. And it's my 18th birthday, so my mind is not there. I don't want to be there. I'm trying to go club. I'm trying to go hang out with my friends. I'm just trying to do something. And so he's like sharing this with me for like 5 hours. And after 5 hours, he pats me on my leg. He goes upstairs to his room. And that following morning, 2 a.m., my mom knocks on the door. She says, hey, I need you to come help me get your dad out of bed. He's not responding. And so I go downstairs to his room. I pull him out of bed. He's already dead. And I sit there, man, for like an hour, just kind of in shock and in awe. And like, man, that was the last conversation I ever had with my father. And I was not even paying attention. And so from that moment, it kind of shaped me and really changed my perspective of how I live my life and how I steward relationships and how I lean into conversations. And so I ended up going to Hampton University to play basketball, and was there my freshman year, and in my apartment just felt this call of God, man, to do something different. I had no desire to be in ministry, had no want. I couldn't stand church because I thought that it killed my dad. But man, I just had this undeniable feeling like you gotta step up. You gotta start serving people. And so I left Hampton the same week, moved to Detroit, Michigan. Started off in Bible college, was able to transfer over some credits. And so I was able to finish on time. Finished there, got my degree, moved back to Crawford, North Carolina, and stepped in and started co-pastoring the church with my mom.
Wow.
And that was 18 years ago.
How old were you at that time?
I was 20.
You were 20 when
20
you
years
said.
old. Yeah. 20 years old.
When you started co-pastoring.
Yeah.
Wow.
This massive church.
Yeah.
So, I compare it to like putting on a suit and dousing yourself with gasoline.
Oh,
running
Big
through the
Brother.
fire, right?
Man, well, I want to ask you this because again, I think, and I appreciate you sharing that because again, the fact that like, a lot of people don't have those stories of like, oh man, a father who was a giant, like in the faith, and then like, like you said, but that's like, I'm sitting here listening, I'm like, yo, man, that's like you said, like that's biblical. Like your father, like your last story talking about my son, what you gonna be,
Right.
and then he passes away.
Yeah.
I'm like, I guess the question, I know you think about this, like knowing you weren't leaning in, and I know it's one of the regrets. Like, man, if you could go back, right, or say like right now, you can spend a few hours with your father. Like, what would you ask him?
Oh man!
Like, what would you ask him?
At this stage in my life, I would ask him why or what shaped your perspective about loving people the way you do. Because he loved people. I mean, so at the time, my church, man, was 9,000 or 10,000 members. We had 5 services a Sunday. I saw him stand in the front and talk to everybody he could in between every single service and after the last one.
Wow.
And I for me, that was one of the things that marked me. It marks my leadership. It's what gave me an image of what's possible when you walk with people, when you love people, when you pastor people, when you shepherd people, and you can't get people out of your heart. And I think that's the difference between a preacher and a pastor. Because a pastor really carries the heart of a father, and a father can never get their kids out of their heart.
Wow.
And so for me, I would just ask him that. And, he told me something one time that kind of stuck to me, and I believe it would still be his answer. And I just asked him, why do you stand at the front, like after every service? Just as a 11-year-old kid, why do you stand at the front? He said, well, I want people to be able to touch me. And I was like, why? He was like, because people often believe if you're untouchable, what you do is unobtainable.
Oof.
Oh. If I had a Jamaican siren.
Right.
Hey,
Wow.
Caleb, it's Caleb. I may have Caleb add that to the effects in production. Caleb add the effects. Man.
Wow.
Yeah, say that again, please.
So if people perceive that you're untouchable, they think that what you do is unobtainable. And so it's super important for him that people could feel him, see that he's real, see that he's a human being, so that they understand and know that what he is doing is also obtainable in whatever sphere that they're doing, whether it's ministry, whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's business, whether it's working a 9 to 5, whatever it may be. But I think oftentimes we think when we see these figures on stage that what they do, we can achieve. And he just wanted to kind of tear that wall down and say, okay, you know what? The only way that they know it's real is if I walk with them, if they're able to feel it, if they're able to touch it, if they're able to see that this person is in fact real. And, you know, that is what changed for us, just the perspective of how we saw ministry and how we saw church. And so he would always tell me, he said, you know what? Teaching may bring people, but it's the love that keeps people. People don't care what you know. They don't care the revelation. They don't care the scripture. They don't care your theology. They don't care any of that stuff if, in fact, they don't feel loved first.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think, you know, for me, one of the things that, you know, we try to do even now is walk with people before we try to force things down their throat.
Yeah.
You know, so, and, you know, we've seen God do some incredible things through that approach.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I think, you know, I want to ask this because I think it goes into it. And I know Michelle has a question she wants to, but I want to, because you start talking about how your dad, and when we've had conversations before, it's like, man, how it was so much outside of like the church world, right? You know what I mean? It was like, I mean, from, you said you come to church. I remember we were talking, you know, a few weeks ago. You're like, man, it doesn't matter. You know, who you see.
Anybody.
You can see. I said you can see a coach. You can see a movie star. People just coming in because your dad like care about that. You know, and our desire, you know, what we do is this idea, and I really feel like God's ultimately doing in the earth, this idea of launching innovative reconcilers, right? People who know God, people who are connected to God, you know how to connect others to God, connected to one another, and they know how to connect others in ministry of reconciliation, but also they're connected to their meaningful work in the earth. And they know, and their meaningful work actually inspires others to connect to their meaningful works. I think so many times we disconnect Genesis 1:28 and Matthew 28. It's like you get, you know, go make disciples. Like, okay, what are we connecting them to? It's like, okay, we'll just hold off until, you know, a little more life, go to church, you know, do the stuff, raise your kids, and then, you know, you died, and all the other stuff happens, versus like, oh, no, it's going to go back to Genesis 1:28, go into the world, make something of the world. So it's something your father, I mean, like was doing for a long time. I know something you're passionate about. Can you speak to that? Because I know that's something where I mean, because again, even as I was like, you know, as I was preparing for this, you know, looking on IG and stuff like that, it's like, then I'm also, I was kind of going through the IG, I'm like, hold up. That's Floyd Mayweather. I'm like, man, what the heck? You know, I'm like, Floyd Mayweather. It's like, I mean, like, you are in these spaces and worlds. But you aren't one of those things. You aren't one of those guys I've always would appreciate about you. You're not in those worlds as a guy who actually like. I think sometimes guys go in there and they go for their own clout. In the church world versus like, yo, I'm just here. Like, because like, a lot of times I don't ever see you like with pictures of people. Like, you don't really do that. You know what I'm saying? And so I guess I think the question I'm gonna ask: why is that it's so important to actually go into that world? That's been some part of your whole family legacy to go and serve and actually be in those world. And honestly, to be misunderstood sometimes because of people you hang out with. So kind of tell me, why is that so passionate in your own heart?
I think, number one, I saw it modeled in front of me. And I think you'll understand this because you have this grace on your life that to me is an apostolic calling. And so when we look at, biblically speaking, that office, people think apostle is attached to church. None of the apostles had a church. The first 12 never had a church. And so it was broken down for, as a matter of fact, the word apostle is a military term. It means to go in, to infiltrate, infuse culture and theology, and go somewhere else. And so I think we really do ourselves a disservice when we think that the theology that God has given us is for just the church. And so my assignment is to take what God is doing in the earth, because it's bigger than just a church.
Yeah.
He says in John chapter 3, verse 16, for I so love the world. And I think certain times we look at that scripture and we think he's talking about the church. No, he's talking about the world.
Yeah.
He loves the world. The church is in it, but he also has children who do not yet recognize and identify him as their father that he's actively pursuing. And so really it's my job to go into these spaces and share the culture of the kingdom and share the theology that God has given me, so that they have an opportunity to see the Jesus I serve is real and alive, even in the spaces that they may be living their life in. Wow. And I think oftentimes we think, okay, they're going to come. If I teach, I stand here, they're going to come to me. And the reality is we have to go to them. Right. And so if we don't go to them, they may never come.
Right.
So how do you, and again, I mean, I could stay down this rabbit hole.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to say, so, because again, you know how this goes. You get critics that'll say, okay, well, you know, at the end of the day, and that people will, you know, well, when you go preach the gospel, right? You know, that they, which again, a lot of times I tell people, I'm like, I tell a lot of times people who go there first, I'm like, man, like how anxiety driven we are so many times. So like, well, when you go preach the gospel to them, I'm like, well, like, you know, like first, let me get into this, like, trust God, that God draws all men near. And so when he opens the opportunity, so, but how do you balance that? Because again, the worlds I know that you skated in, all times the worlds I'm in, it's like, I want to hear from you, like, how do you manage it? Because there are point times where, you know, there's people, their lifestyle, there's things like that they live. And at some point you got enough of a relationship to where you begin to actually talk to them about that. Sure. How do you actually really do that? Because I think that's one of the best misconceptions, because they'll just say, oh, well, there are people in spaces, they ain't actually really sharing and preaching God. And I know from conversation, from people who, you know, who know you, they were like, that actually, who aren't really even serving Jesus, they're like, oh, no. They're like, Pastor Tim about that life. Oh, he talked to me. They actually know they ain't living right. It is because of you. Yeah. But they still talk about you in such an affection. So how do you actually do that?
I think the people that are shouting, why don't you just preach the gospel, have never been in a room with people who don't yet understand the gospel.
That's great.
So, you know, I also think that you don't have to announce what you are when you live it.
Oh, say that again, please. Yes.
You don't have to announce what you are when you live it. I didn't wake up this morning and look in the mirror and say, you know what? Your name is Tim Timberlake. Right? You're Tim Timberlake. You know, it's one of those things. I know who I am. I know what I believe. And my life is a reflection of that belief. And so when I develop relationship with these people, they see the life that I live, and something about the life that I live should draw them to ask questions about that life, because it's different from what they have seen. And it works every single time. I'm a firm believer. Whatever you feed will follow you. Point blank, period. If I'm feeding them what God has placed on the inside of me, I don't have to preach to them. And so I think the evidence of that is all throughout New Testament. When we see Jesus, okay, what was it about Jesus that made the disciples leave what they were doing to follow him? He didn't preach to them. He didn't talk to them about the gospel yet. He just said, hey, drop what you're doing, come follow me. There was something about the life that he lived that activated something in their life that brought them to the belief in their core that said, you know what? This man is going to feed me. Wow. And when we surround ourselves with people who don't yet believe, or with these people that have influence, or these people that are of affluence, there's something in us that activates something on the inside of them that allows them to know this person's going to feed me.
That's really good.
And so whatever we feed will follow it. It's just like if I got a little dog. I have a little dog named Bandit. Homie was 14 before he died. I could leave a little crumb. He'll come. He'll get that crumb. He'll come closer to me. He'll jump up on my leg and wait for me to feed him more. He was following whatever fed him. We are the same way. We follow whatever feeds us. Whenever we are getting fed, our spirits, our soul gravitate towards that. And it's like a magnet. It sticks. And so for us, we don't have to preach what we are. And I think one of the biggest missed opportunities for a lot of people who are in ministry or have some type of spiritual authority, is they think that they have to change these people.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
I got to change them. We don't have the power to change people, but what we can do is love people.
Yep.
That's it. That's what God calls us to do. Love people. Let me do the work. He says, when you lift me up, I'll draw.
Yeah.
We waste most of our time trying to draw.
Yeah.
That's it. And I think you said, I mean, you're spot on with that, because I think that, we talk so much here about, with emotional intelligence and the idea of anxiety. And I think so many times in our world is so polarized that it's become that people, it's like, and you said it great, it's like we have to put this badge on to make everyone think. Yep. And I think many times we're trying to convince ourselves that we actually are what we already are. Well, no, I am this, so I got to go tell people this. And I'm like, well, no, you don't have to tell anybody anything. And you trust. And I've seen over the years, the numerous amounts of people I had the privilege of leading to a relationship with Jesus has been that. It's been out of, this is who I am. I live this life. I do it. And then at the end of the day, I just really like, God, you're going to have to do this anyway. Sure. There's people right now where they've come. There's people I've been on a 6, 7, 8 year journey with. And it's funny, I was with one of them recently, and we're sitting in the city official's office, and the city official was pushing out, saying, man, you need to be going to church and da-da-da. And I'll never forget, he says, and then this guy literally looks and he says, man, and he looks at the city official and he says, in my years of knowing, and he's never invited me once, but I am so intrigued by going and starting to connect. He starts sharing, and I've been his friend. Yeah. And we just add value, and we do this because I trust. But now behind closed doors, I'm constantly praying for him. Yeah. I'm constantly believing that. Sure. And then whenever those doors open, I'm able to inject things of the kingdom. But I trust that. So I love the fact of what you said. You don't have to listen. You don't have to say, what you already are. And I think I love that point. So
yeah. So kind of tying all of this together, just in terms of being in culture, influencing culture. As innovative reconcilers, that's one of the things we talk about a lot, and going into culture and adding value, but also at the same time being problem solvers. So we're going in, we're looking for problems that we can solve. And we talk a lot about just this issue of disconnection and being disconnected from each other, trying to connect better. Would you say, in your book, you said this one quote that I thought was super good, how you're known by the problems we solve or the problems we create. Do you feel like one of the problems you're called to solve in this world is around the problem of connection and being able to relate well with other people, or where would you say that it would be around?
Yeah, I think that's one of the major problems that we should be trying to solve, because we are made for connection, right? We are created for relationship. And, if we silo ourselves, then we really do our destiny a disservice. It's not that we won't reach those places that we desire to reach. It's that it will take us substantially longer, when in fact we could have had a conversation and saw someone else's experience or saw how someone else did it, that allows us to reach the places that we desire to go a lot faster. And so I'm a firm believer that our destiny and our future moves towards us at the speed of our connections. And so our connections determine our collections. Right. And so if I'm not connected to anything, what's my power source? Because I'm only as strong as my relationships.
Yeah.
And so if I look to my right, if I look to my left, and I don't have people alongside of me that are going in the same direction as me, what tends to happen is I start to feel the resistance of life, and it slows me down. And the best way for me to describe it is when we see geese flying. They always fly in a triangle, right? There's one goose at the front, there's other goose beside him. And I always kind of looked at them and thought, man, why in the world do they fly like that? Well, it's so that on the left side, their right wings connect to each other. So on the left side, their left wings connect to each other to help fight the wind resistance, so that they can fly a lot more efficient and a lot faster. It's not that they can't fly alone. It's that they fly better connected to each other. And I think we live our lives better with each other.
Yeah.
And so as we have these dreams in our heart, as we have these desires, as we have these wants, these needs, these grandiose ideas, it's great to look at someone else and say, okay, how did they do that? Because that is not the blueprint, but it can be a portion of the blueprint that God has you put together so that you could excel at a faster pace. There's no reason I should be still hitting my head on the wall for things that my dad hit his head on the wall with.
Yeah.
There should be no reason I should be stuck in a season or a situation that I know PA has dealt with and has overcome.
Yeah.
Right. But if I don't have those connections, I create the example that I need to live by. When in fact, he already has an example. He already has a model that I can just pick up the phone and say, hey, how did you deal with this?
Yeah.
And because he's already hit his head against the wall, I can avoid hitting my head.
Yeah.
We don't get that when we don't have connection.
Yeah.
And so when it's what we're created for, when it's what we're made for, there's always this hole, this emptiness in us until we find that connection.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I mean, I always tell people all the time, man, somebody's already paid. If somebody's already paid $1 million, if somebody's already paid $1 million, I'm gonna go ahead and take that free game.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? Versus
Sure.
I'm like, I tell somebody, sometimes y'all like I tell people a lot of times, you learn to fight. Like you had a lot of hurt. You know, you had a lot of hurt and pain that you just did for like, man, you could have got that for free. You didn't have to take all of that pain. You know what I'm saying? For like that less. I'm like, man, on top of it, you got like a $5 like return on that. And I'm like, man, for $1 million, that's bad.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it's terrible. I'm like, you didn't need that. Like, I know I'm not going there. But anyway, we talk about connection and we're here now in this current cultural moment, especially with, 2020 and what it was, especially when it came to the idea of racial tension, all the stuff that's happening. Again, as someone who is, coming up and you had this, being in this, predominantly African American church, and then, but a deep desire, and again, being in a, being in a biracial multi-ethnic marriage, and then now you have this multi-ethnic church and all the stuff, you're hard for it. Again, first of all, I'm going to ask you, because I always ask people this, especially people who are like, how are you doing through this? Because I tell people 2020, and it's always hard when I'm trying to explain to people, it was just a year.
For sure.
It was just a year. Regardless of the pandemic, whatever, there was just this thing, especially for, for people of color, so like, African Americans, where we're like, man, like it was something that happened there. So that's one. So one, how are you doing? And two, what is your thought on what you're seeing in our current cultural moment with the divide and everything?
Yeah, to answer the first question, I think anybody that says they were not impacted by 2020 is lying. Okay,
100%. Yeah.
Because I don't care what you do, you feel the tension and the pain of humanity. This is what 2020 did. 2020 sped up whatever you were dealing with. So whether it was a good season of, let's just say, business, oh man, it sped it up. If it was a terrible season of business, it sped it up. It exposed and it sped up everything that you may have been going through. And so, when we look at humanity and we see what is happening now, we see the fallout from things that have been sped up. And anything that arrives too soon, anything that arrives too fast, anything that arrives prematurely always arrives too small. And so what we're doing now is trying to see what it is that has arrived and how we can grow into it. And so, it also, to answer the second question, it was so polarizing that culture and society said you have to choose. Yeah. This or that. You have to choose white or black. You have to choose Republican or Democrat. You have to choose evangelical or this type of church. You have to choose. And the reality is that is the opposite of Jesus.
It really is. Yes. Yeah.
Because Jesus didn't choose. Jesus was the glue that brought both of them together and said, you know what? I know what you believe. I know what you believe, but this is who I am. And because of who I am, you two can coexist together. And so 2020 showed us how society really views difference. That's it.
So in being sped up and feeling like things are going really fast, and there's just a lot happening in 2020, and just as Black people in this room, how do you take advantage of every minute? How do you make the most of every minute and grieve and be upset and be angry and not lose hope all at the same time?
For sure. I think you hit the nail on the head. Give yourself time to grieve. Right? Because we don't look at seasons of our life and say, you know what, that was a hard season. Let me take some time to grieve, because all of us lost something. I mean, if for nothing, we lost a way of living that we had known for many, many years. And so to say, you know what, I'm just going to wake up, I'm going to go about my day just like it's any other day. It doesn't do us any good to hide what we feel. It doesn't do us any good to hide who we are. This is the reality. God cannot bless who we pretend to be. And so if we don't go through the process of allowing ourselves to heal, then we don't allow God to get us to the season he desires for us to be in. And so we can't determine how we get wounded. So we can't determine how 2020 wounded us. We can't determine how often it wounded us, but we can determine how we heal. And when we take time to sit down and say, okay, I may not be able to process everything, but I can process something. When we take the time to do that, it allows God to reset us, refresh us, refocus us, so that distractions won't become opportunities. And so the first thing is to grieve what was lost. The second thing is gratitude. Be thankful for what you got left. Right? And so we're not blessed by what we get. We're blessed by what we retain. So we get a lot of stuff, we lose it, and that's not a blessing. We are only blessed by the things that we retain. So what is it that we still have left that God desires to use? When we look at it from that perspective, I think, it really shifts our focus, sets our focus to say, okay, you know what? Life is still a blessing. I still got opportunity in front of me. And God has so much more in front of me than it was behind me.
And I think the part I love is the fact of the process of like, man, you grieve, but then you can be thankful. It's kind of like the idea of, when you look at like, I tell people when you read Psalms, it's like you read Psalms, literally it's like reading the song. It's like, it's like leaving like the, songs of a schizophrenic man. You know what I'm saying? You're like, when it starts off, you're like, this is like, it starts off like, you going hard, like, Meat Meal, Dreams and Nightmares. And then by the end of it, you're like an R&B ballad. I'm like, what just happened in this song right now, right? And so, but I think it's what you said, it's grieve, but it's also on the end of it being thankful. And I think that's it. But again, it goes back to what you said earlier about everyone saying you have to choose. And I think it's the idea, like, you don't have to choose grief or being grateful. You don't have to choose those. It's like really both can coexist together. Like you can grieve and you can be grateful. And that's actually how you actually get healthy through the process. And I think that's one of the things I'm constantly telling people, one is that, for even some of my friends who are white, I always say, I'm like, listen, one of the things that you're seeing in 2020, a couple of things. And I was like, well, one of the biggest, like, it's okay for Black people, like, to be mad. It just says anger and sin not. And I think so many times in the church world, we have such an awful, like, theology or even understanding of of scripture and like emotionality. I'm like, please remember, like, the first murder was because he felt some type of way. It literally said, why are you depressed? Why are you angry? But it said sin's crowding at the door. It didn't say it overtake you. It's sitting there. And then what is God? And I love that part, because God shows up to Cain, and Cain says, like, why do you feel that way? Like, God didn't show up to Cain like, yo fam, stop being mad, stop being angry, confess this. No, he just says there, why? Because he actually wanted him to like self-discover, because actually, like, oh no, if he would have said, man, Cain would have said like, oh, because I'm jealous my brother did this, it would have been a whole different thing, because it wasn't like God was like, okay, let me walk you through that, versus he didn't deal with it. And then it spins out from there. And I'm constantly telling people the problem today is when, I see in churches, like, when you're trying to tell people stop being angry and mad, all you're going to do, especially in this current moment, is make people more angry and mad. Because you got to I tell people, trust the Spirit. If you've done your job in discipleship, and you trust the Holy Spirit, let the Holy Spirit do his work. If they start to deviate and go, oh man, they're going to get root or bitter, the same God who dealt with your root of bitterness, the same God did with theirs. Like, no, give them room. And it doesn't mean, and so I just think that's really important for everyone listening to this, is that to grieve, but also on the other side is the idea of gratitude, because again, that's what keeps you kind of moving and going forward. I want to kind of, again, because I know we've been taking some time, but jumping to the book, like, why now? I know you feel like this is such a life work. I mean, to a point that, you did, and again, I tuned in, to summer. I wish I said I was in there, but 24 hours, you did this whole broad for 24 straight hours, which I was like, yo, you told me that. I'm like, all right, like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But 24 straight hours, all these different people. But it's like, this is like a life work of yours. Mm-hmm. What made you decide to do it right now in this moment?
How we look at time. I think a lot of times we look at time as this endless commodity that is promised to us. And at the beginning of 2020, and as COVID started kicking off, I just started to look at people lose their minds because they had this misconception of time. And one of the greatest misconceptions of time is time management. You go to the bookstores all the time and see all these great time management books, and it's like, oh, do this with your time. And it's just like, man, how can you manage what you do not control?
Oh,
you know what I'm saying? So you can't tell time to stop. You can't tell time to go. You can't pause time. You can't rush it. And so if we can't manage time, what can we do? It's steward time. And so how can we become better stewards over the time that God gives us? And one of the things that really kind of sticks out to me, even back to what you were saying, and we'll tie it kind of all into the book, the only time we fail in life is when we get what we want.
Yeah, please unpack that.
Yeah,
you gotta unpack that.
Think about it. Whenever we fail in life, whenever we fall short, whenever we stumble, it's because we actually got what we wanted. Right? That's why David said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I have no wants." So if we don't get what we want, then God has something bigger for us, and it's what we need. That's why he says in Philippians, "I'll supply all your needs according to his riches and glory through Christ Jesus." And sometimes we stumble into what we want and we forfeit the opportunity to get what we need. And 2020 was what we needed, but it wasn't what we wanted. And so because we got what we needed and we actually experienced one of the greatest teachers in life called pain, it has brought us to a place of understanding our dependency on God. And so, we hear all these different lessons about, how to have great relationship and steward relationship and how to steward your finances and how, how to steward your time. But we don't really hear a lot about how to steward pain. And this book, The Power of 1440, is just a journey of how we can steward the pain that we encounter, because pain can either push you back or it can propel you forward. And so my desire with this message is just to help people navigate the pain of life in a way where they understand, okay, you may encounter pain in these 1,440 minutes you have in a day, but there's tomorrow.
Wow.
And so how can we be intentional about the minutes that we have right now, push beyond what we want, and actually lean into what it is that we need? And sometimes what we need is uncomfortable. Sometimes what we need is painful. But I'm a firm believer when we get what we need, we always get more than what we want.
Wow. I thought, when you were saying, you first started off, I'm like, where's he about to go with this? About the want and the need. And I feel like it's one of those moments where, again, as people know this on the podcast, I'm a big Jay-Z fan. It's like the moment you listen to a J line and you hear it for like the 15th time, you're like, oh, that's what he meant. You're like, oh, that was way deeper than I thought.
Wow,
you know what I'm saying? Yeah, I didn't realize it was like that. You know what I'm saying? I didn't realize it was that deep. But no, that's what it was. And it was incredible. And the idea, especially at the end, and I want to speak to the idea of the comfort zone, because I heard something recently, man, it messed me up. Is this idea of comfort zone. And it was listening to Mark Sayers, and he's been on our pod, and I love Mark, and at Australia, and he was quoting somebody, and he said, like, comfort zone literally is privilege and fear.
That's it.
And I was like, he said that, and I'm like driving. I'm driving. I had one of my almost a black church. My mama took my shoe up, threw it out the car. You know, like, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, hit that back 10 seconds, but like, you better preach. I'm talking to him, like, but he said that, but it's so true, because it's like, and what he ultimately was getting to is like, if you're not constantly uncomfortable, you internally, you just don't grow.
Right.
You stop growing. And I think that is where, and I tell to our team, I say to people all the time, like, if within anything I leave, like, if you're looking for safe waters, like where, okay, we're going to be okay, so be calm. this is the wrong place,
Right.
because it's just constantly uncomfortable. You know what I'm saying? It's like constantly uncomfortable. It's like you're growing. There's a fortitude that's there. And as soon as, like you said, as soon as you get to a place where, like, okay, you just stop growing.
Yeah.
And it is. And I love that, because I think at first pass, people will read the book, they'll see the book, and they'll say, again, people will who maybe come from more of a conservative, far right, like kind of theology. Oh, well, this is some of that, prosperity, name it and claim it.
No.
But as I know, it's not. It's actually about, no, it's all about suffering.
Yeah.
It's just literally about suffering. But what I love about it is like, no. And what I do love that you do, Tim, is that because of depth, you bring stuff to people in a way they're like, I'm gonna pick that up. I'm for it. But then you get in the book, you're like, oh, fam, I didn't realize this. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like a chocolate bar, then it's like it's broccoli inside. You're like, you're like, oh man, but all right, but it's very good though. It's like it's tricky. It really is, because when you read the copy, you're like, oh man, it's gonna be self-help. It's gonna be da 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 da. And they could go in all those sections, but then when you open it up, it's like, oh, just listen. It's like I always tell people, yeah, it's just painful. Life, it's just gonna be. It's just going. Like, it's Clubber Lang. It's Clubber Lang and Rocky 3. We're gonna give them pain.
One of the things that I've learned, I did little research on it. We think stress is bad, right? We think stress is bad, and we teach that stress is bad. Stress is bad. Distress is bad. We need a certain level of stress in our life to maintain stability. If I'm a tightrope walker, and I'm walking on this line, I need a certain amount of stress in the line to get me from point A to point B. Where it gets dangerous is when the line gets in distress and starts to unravel and untwine. That makes it unsafe for me to walk on. One of the biggest misconceptions about stress is it's dangerous, it's ungodly, it's unhealthy. No, unmanaged stress are those things. But there is a certain amount of stress that we should have in our life that always pushes us closer to Jesus. It always reminds us and keeps our focus on the big picture, because it's only through that tension that we grow. If I'm working out and there is no tension in what I'm doing, I'm not stretching my muscles. It's not until I sit under stress, under weight, under that tension that I actually grow the muscles that I intend to grow. And it's the same thing with our life. It's not until we sit under the weight of the tension, the stress, the discomfort, that we get an opportunity to be who it is that God called us to be. And one of the things we're seeing in our culture and society today, they think the opposite of courage is being a coward. And that's not the case. The opposite of courage is being comfortable.
Wow.
When we get comfortable, we lay down our ability to pursue our God-given dreams with courage. And it's not until we operate under that level of tension, under that level of some type of healthy stress, that we really understand what's possible when we believe.
It's so good.
Wow.
So in we're doing the Nehemiah Institute, which is where we train a lot of our innovative reconcilers. And in the class we're doing right now is a lot about theology of work, authenticity. We talk a lot about the extremes between Jesus and God almost like your genie. Like if I serve God, he's going to tell me my calling, it's going to be super easy. Or my calling is just to serve God. It's going to be all suffering all the time, super hard. I'm going to be like super impoverished and poor. How do you manage the tension between God has these incredible things for me, it's still going to be hard, and what it looks like to do both realistically?
Yeah, when we look at it from the perspective of, what he says, if your parents being evil give you these things, how much more do I desire to do for you being good? And you look at that, that's like a parental statement. I tell my son all the time, no. All the time. He's 4 years old. I tell him no, not because I don't want to actually do for him what he's asking me for, but that no is protection. When he was first learning how to walk, he would go to the stairs and I would tell him no. And when he would continue to pursue the stairs, I would tell him no. And then I would pop his butt. And he would look at me like, yo, what the heck are you doing? I just want to walk down the steps. And that no was protection. Could he walk? Absolutely. Was he a good walker? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Could he have fallen?
Wow.
Could he have fallen on the steps? Yes, he could have. But it was the no of me that helped protect and secure his future. And I think a lot of times in order for us to understand the balance, we have to understand that a lot of God's no's are for the yeses that he desires to give us.
Wow.
And so it's not either prosperity nor is it broke man's mentality, but it's a prioritized life, because the reality is there is no balance.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't give balance to the things in our life. I'm not going to give the same balance of time to a stranger as I do my personal friends.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to give the same balanced time to God as I do anything else. It should never be balanced. And so it has to be priorities. And so when we prioritize these things, we can take a look back and ask God these questions. Okay, will it make an eternal impact? Is it necessary? And is it pushing me closer to you?
Yeah.
And that helps us to have balance. It helps us not to lean too heavy onto the prosperity, helps us not to lean too heavy onto the poverty, because there has to be a priority in our life that says, you know what, God, I want what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's where, and I think that's incredible, because I think it's the most of life is just, it's managing the tension. And, why we even our Nehemiah Institute, we work so much on we go 6 weeks and, where we talk so much about emotionality in the gospel is because if you don't understand what drives you, how anxiety drives you, how fear drives you, how those things drive you, and them things coming underneath. Because many times I tell people the gospel, most times for most believers, never get to their emotions. I'm like, really? He came to make you a new creation. And most of us, it's always focused on your body. It's like, don't do this, don't do this. And all those things are absolutely. But then it's like, I realized this as I got older, most of the work that he's doing is in man, my motives, my intentions, what drives me to when my wife says this, why does that make me feel this type of way? And, we really work people through. And I always tell people at the end of the rabbit hole is always idolatry. At the end of the rabbit hole, at the end of it, it's all now. But the thing about the rabbit hole, you deal with your emotions as you go, and then you realize ultimately what's there, and teaching them that, because in our world right now, it's extremism. I was talking to somebody about it today. It's where you're having people, one of the things that I'm seeing in a church where you're having people who, they say they'll care for people of color, but then because they feel, and I understand a push from, say, far left progressive things that are out, and it's like where their anxiety, we're fighting that. Right. Well, in the midst of you fighting that, you're just rolling over your people who you say you love by putting this out there. Well, this is coming from there. I'm like, no. And it's what Dr. Zoda always says, be an expert of self. See, when I think when that stuff starts driving you, and the reason why I say that is just the tension we have to manage when it comes to these two extremes. Because I tell people Hebrews 11 is one of the greatest things, because I read it and I'm like, it is the kingdom, and that's actually there are people, you do the first part and all these incredible stories, and then it's like, and then it just grows into and there were some, man, they were Saul and two, they were, they were ripped apart, and the world wasn't worthy of both of them. And I read that, and I'm like, oh God. And I think for everybody's like, like John the Baptist, it's like, oh yeah, the ministry was popping. And he died, and then he died being beheaded. I'm like, that was and I tell people, so if you can, hey, my best life now, I'm like, it may be you be beheaded. Absolutely. Or it could be you know what, you could live, in a way that's honorable as people have, and they do that. Or it could be man, again, look at your dad. A guy who, impacted, did all these things, and really would love people dearly. And then he was faced with this situation, but yet still but he was blessed on all those things. And it's such a thing about the kingdom of God. I think that's why I believe the Bible and God so much, because it actually makes sense with suffering. For sure. That my suffering actually means something in the kingdom of God. And so, man, we've held you. I want to ask you this as we come to a close, is that, as you were, writing this stuff, you're doing all these things, you're looking at our world forward. If you actually could say, hey, you know what, man, an individual, I like to ask you this question. You could give an individual, we gave a man, right now, if I walk in your parking lot and they're doing, man, again, shout out to y'all giving COVID tests out there, COVID vaccines out there to hold in the parking lot, but if you can inject somebody with something, I can, and it would just inject them with it, what would it be?
This would tie in this whole last kind of conversation. It would be that the gospel, since this is street theology, the gospel should both bless you and blister you. And if it doesn't, it's not the gospel.
Oh, there it is.
That's it.
There it is. Listen, let me tell you this right now. If we didn't have these we had these mics on the stand, I would have literally been okay with you just like, yo, I'm dropping the mic, just walk out the room.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You know it's at the end of Jay-Z. What more can I say?
What more can I say?
Hey, matter of fact, Fry, I need that in the back. I need post-production. It's like, what more can I say? No, man. But Pastor Tim, hey, I really do, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate all your work you do, man. And I appreciate and I really do. I mean, again, one of the things I'm learning, the older I get is get flowers, you know what I'm saying? Whether they still can smell them, right? And it's like, I really do. I mean, as I watch you, again, I know you said, man, I got a small platform. I mean, again, as a guy who I've watched, leaders in this current moment just unfortunately unravel, who've had social media platforms and all things like that. The one thing I've always appreciated about you is the way that you approach the work, that you're willing to have the courage and not be cowardly. It's like, no. These people who have influence, they need Jesus, just like the homeless guy on the street needs Jesus. And you're willing to go in there and you're willing to serve them and you really don't want anything from them. And I think that's why. I think that's at the end of the day, when you go in places, you don't want anything. And I think that's what happens. I mean, and that's one thing I want to let you know. I really appreciate that you're willing to go in these places, but you're willing to go in these places like, I'm here to be a servant. I'm here to give. I don't want that from you. And watching how God has used you, watching how you're impacting, changing, watching how people who maybe would never darken the door of a church are willing to pick up the book. They're willing to talk about you. They're willing to say, oh, no, get this, do this. And I just want to let you know, I really appreciate that. Because again, I mean, you are literally an embodiment of what we are launching. We're doing the Innovative Reconcile. So I really appreciate you, man.
Man, I'm honored. Thank you for you all having me on. It's been a blast, and we got to do this again, man.
Yeah.
We got to do like a part 2.
We do have to. Yeah, we definitely have to do a part 2, and it's going to be good. So, hey guys, well, we appreciate you being with us, and and again, make sure you comment, 5 stars. Remember, 5-star ratings. Don't 1-star us, please. I'm begging you. Like, listen, if you're like the 1-star rating, you're probably the thumbs down YouTube guy on videos, right? Like, listen, I mean, just don't do that, okay? But anyway, make sure you leave a comment. Let us know, what you thought, and again, make sure you share your like. And again, and that's where we're here at Street Theology, to actually help in your everyday life to be able to walk this thing out, to be an innovative reconciler in the places, spaces God's called you. So until next time, we'll see you soon.